Welcome to BioGenerator. I'm Jim McCarter, Senior Managing Director. So BioGenerator creates, builds, and invests in companies that are solving important problems in human health and agriculture. We're the startup arm of BioSTL, which is a nonprofit that has laid the foundation for the growing innovation economy in St. Louis. And we're proud to have our chairman, John McDonnell, here in the front row. So thank you, John, for joining us, and thank you for all you do for BioSTL and BioGenerator. So over the last 15 years, BioGenerator has invested nearly $50 million to help start 134 biotech companies here in the St. Louis region. And those companies have gone on to raise over $2.8 billion in follow-on investment. We've also supported 150 companies with space here in the BioGenerator labs in Cortex and at the Helix Center in 39 North. So for our third Innovators Hour at BioGenerator, I'm pleased to speak with Blake Marggraff, the co-founder and CEO of CareSignal and the current CEO of TCare. So welcome, Blake.
Thanks, Jim.
Now, Blake, you grew up in Lafayette, California, and you had some pretty remarkable achievements. So I'm going to brag on you for a little bit. So before coming to St. Louis to attend Washington University, Blake actually won which beat out thousands and thousands of entries. You won the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair. So congrats on that from, I know many years ago. But you did it, interestingly, you weren't part of a large lab or at a university. You built in your garage your own homemade X-ray machine and then figured out some important findings on secondary radiation effects on cancer cells. So this is a guy who we know from your background that you don't just learn and you're not just an academic, you actually build things. And so that's kind of what you've done here in St. Louis. And so what I'd like to start with is tell us about your arrival at WashU, and in particular, your decision to start a company during your sophomore year. So why did you do that, and what did you learn from that experience?
WashU as an institution, St. Louis as a city, was just beginning to do a lot of good work to build an ecosystem. So I think I was very lucky. I mean, that's been the theme of the past 10, 15 years. I've been very, very lucky. But I came to St. Louis right as Arch Grants was getting off the ground, right as BioGenerator was starting to make bets in, frankly, unproven founders and entrepreneurs. WashU was trying to connect students from across different disciplines. And WashU sponsored me for a national entrepreneurship program where I got to meet folks across the country and became fascinated with startups and then specifically education technology, which was my first company prior to CareSignal.
Yeah, and so tell us, what did that company do? What was the product?
It's still going. It's an amazing venture. The company creates maker labs inside shipping containers. So think a half-length shipping container like you'd see from a trailer with 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC machines, all inside. And that would go from school to school, university to university to help students learn by doing, get hands-on.
Yeah. And when you were telling me this story, there were a couple important learnings that then applied to the rest of your career. I think you made some comment about 5% strategy, 95% execution, right? So tell us what did you learn?
Yep. Just as you said, there is no substitute for diving in and doing the thing. You can think about it, you can talk about it, you can have a fantastic plan, but that will never survive the real world. You just have to do it and iterate and iterate.
And tell a little bit about how did you make sales, and how did you keep your budget low?
Well, we had an early customer as part of the University of California system, and I grew up in the East Bay, California. Was driving out to the UC Davis campus that summer, going to Home Depot, literally building out this space. But then we had a launch event. And for this event, we had a marketing budget of $50, not, 50 with some zeros behind it. And I started researching. And do you know what you can get for $50? You can't get much.
Not much.
No?
Yeah.
So I found, I was driving, I saw those sprinkler yard signs, little plastic things to mark where there's new piping. I bought something like 3,000 sprinkler yard signs for pennies a piece with our logo printed onto the little thin plastic. And for our launch event, we had iPhone photography of hundreds of people waving our flag with the little logo, the sprinkler yard signs. It was a different level of scrappy.
Excellent, excellent. And so let's skip a little bit ahead to your senior year at WashU. So this is exactly 10 years ago, I think, right? So it's the spring of 2015, and you're friends with a WashU MD PhD student named Avik Soam.
Yep.
And Avik, along with a couple of other people, had started a program called Sling Health, which is a student-led bioengineering design and entrepreneurship incubator. And then you and Avik and two other co-founders decided to start a company together. So tell us about that company, kind of what was unique about that founding team and the original product concept.
Yep, we were sitting around having coffee one day and had a handshake as Avik, Evan, Joe, and myself. And we had a handshake because we knew this wouldn't work, but we established the rules of the road for the company. And we were building it on the idea that in the digital health sphere, there were plenty of pure technology solutions, but almost none of them actually had clinical evidence. So the healthcare industry, which is used to rigor, evidence, something becoming the standard of care, and then it has to be used. The industry was like oil and water with most of the innovators. So the breakthrough was to do research first, essentially evidence first, commercialization second, even though that evidence wasn't required for any regulatory reason.
And so that was from the very first conversation, this idea of evidence.
Yep, we would joke that we wanted to be the standard of care, such that when we had a sales conversation, the chief medical officer would hear what we had to offer and then think, well, shoot, now I have to buy it because it's so well proven.
It's a very Washington University kind of concept, right? Yeah, it's not necessarily Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Yeah, and so many startups have these make or break moments or near-death experiences. And you had one pretty early on with CareSignal. So tell me about those original conversations that you were having with Charlie Bolton at BioGenerator Ventures, across the street now, not in this building yet. But what happened in those conversations, and especially what led up to, I think you said July 2nd of 2015. So why was that such a memorable date for you?
I had told the founding team, Andy, the founding team, really talented group, that if I couldn't raise money by the 4th of July, good a date as any, that they should go back to their careers, take the stable job. And we were getting down to it. We had significant funding circled, high six figures circled or even wired, but I had committed not to pull that down until I had a lead investor and reached critical mass of capital. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I had raised without having enough to really give us the runway. And push came to shove, and I needed to find a lead investor with very short notice. And I texted Charlie and said, would BioGenerator be willing to lead? And he said something back, to the effect of, almost certainly not, this is way too fast, but I'll send you the documents, do what you can. We got those 6 or 7 o'clock one evening, and the team was in Cortex, worked till about 4 a.m., worked for 3 hours, played a game of ping pong, worked for another 3 hours, and we turned the documents back to Charlie that next morning. I think he knew we were taking it really seriously, and he eventually got it across the line, led the round.
Yeah, and so that's one of the important roles that BioGenerator plays in the ecosystem, is that we don't have a large checkbook. It may sound like a lot of money, but we invest about $3.5 million a year. But last year we made 16 investments with that. But we leveraged that by doing really extraordinary diligence around those companies in a way that allowed other investors to rely on that diligence to feel comfortable writing their own check. And so how did that work out in terms of follow-on investment?
It gave CareSignal, then ePharmix, the credibility to raise from some fantastic investors across the country: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Madison, Wisconsin, Boston. I say confidently that would not have happened but for BioGenerator and the BioSTL community.
Excellent. So now let's get into the details of the science behind the company and how you actually tested these products in a clinical trial. So unlike many BioGenerator companies, you weren't creating a new drug or medical device or a diagnostic, but you were leveraging technology. And not only that, but also insights that you had into psychology, human behavior, and behavioral design. So can you share with us some examples of what the initial CareSignal products did and how you tested them?
Absolutely. The premise behind what we later branded as deviceless RPM was that by asking the right question.
And if you can say RPM stands for?
Pardon me, thanks. Yeah, deviceless remote patient monitoring.
Okay.
The premise was usually a clinical team only needs to know one or two parameters of symptomatology in order to make an effective decision about how to serve a patient, especially a rising risk patient.
But parameters of symptomatology, what does that mean?
You know, for someone with COPD, is their breathing better, worse, or the same
And
compared
I'm
to
going
the
to
day
catch
before?
you on acronyms again. So
Someone
COPD is
chronic obstructive pulmonary. So
Yeah.
if you know, whether someone has problems breathing, whether someone has problems with their heart,
yeah,
from their perspective, what could they know or feel about their body
right.
that also is clinically informative? What's the center of that Venn diagram? And we honed in on those elements. And then we ran, in many cases, prospective randomized controlled trials, which was unprecedented for I think it was unprecedented for the company in pure digital. And we showed that versus the standard of care, that type of feedback loop would have a major clinical impact, would have an operational benefit to the provider, and then perhaps most importantly would make it financially sustainable, would deliver reduction in utilization.
And when you and I were talking about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease,
Yep.
You know, you didn't ask the person, did you know you have COPD? What question did you ask them, and how are they answering? Are they using a device, or how are they answering?
Yep, it would be the patient would receive a phone call or text message, whatever they preferred, that would simply say, was your breathing worse than it was yesterday? You know, press 1 for worse, 2 for the same. Even when, to your point, even when we reached out to engage with what has now reached well over 1% of the United States in terms of patient population,
Yeah.
we would meet every patient where they were. Everything was a 4th grade reading level. We didn't assume really any clinical literacy at all. It was simply, hey, you know, doctor has a new free program to help serve your lungs, help serve your heart.
Right. And so I know you've published, I think, at least 8 papers, or?
Yeah, I think.
I looked through so on the CareSignal website. So you've got COPD, you've got diabetes, surgery, hypertension, depression, dialysis, medication adherence.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a few, and these are all different clinical trials, right? These are all separate trials, right?
Yep. Anything from a quality improvement study through to a full RCT.
Excellent. So once you had some clinical data and these peer-reviewed publications, so I'm going to be a little facetious here, but it was just really simple to get clients then, right? You just went and said, here's the paper, right? So tell us about the sales cycle and why it was so challenging. And how did you make some changes to the product offering and to your operations that really made it easier, made it a more compelling offering?
This was one of the top 3 breakthroughs for the company. We realized, as many digital health or tech-enabled service players have now embraced, that simply offering the technology was not sufficient. Certainly necessary for success, but to some degree we had to wrap that in our own tailored services, white-labeled services, to support that last mile of getting to the patient. So our team built a software component and then an entire technology-enabled call center, a national team, multilingual, that would reach out telephonically on behalf of our enterprise client partners to enroll patients, members in the case of a payer, made all of the difference in terms of scalability.
Because when you started, you relied on the provider to do some of that, right? And how did that go?
Nobody has time for that.
Nobody has,
Totally understand.
And when you say tech-enabled, what was tech-enabled about it?
We, to sum it all up, I think, if we had a room full of talented folks doing the enrollment manually, it would cost about $40 per enrollment.
Okay.
And we got that cost down to at or below 10% through a bunch of
So down to
sophisticated
$4. So your customer acquisition cost for
that last patient
right
plummeted, which was critical.
And so it's sort of a B2B2C model in some ways, right? So you're selling to a business, and then once you get that sale done, then you have to engage the individuals, right?
Exactly.
So it's a complicated business model.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's skip ahead again a little bit. So now you've been working on the company. It's March of 2020. You've grown the company. You've brought in venture capital. You've solved some of these problems, and you're hitting some sales momentum. And then the COVID pandemic hits. And so tell us about, because it was very unusual what you all did, and not necessarily obvious. And maybe in retrospect, people will say, oh, obviously that's what you would do, but it wasn't obvious at the time. So tell us how CareSignal responded to COVID. I understand you decided to put everything on hold and build a new product. How did you do that, and what happened?
Yeah, the thought process was our target market, frankly, is facing something far more important than whatever we have. So let's help them. Also, it's scary to be a relatively small team. Keep in mind, at this point, the word COVID hadn't even been, formalized or cemented.
What was it called? Is this March of 2020?
This was March. People were, the COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2.
Right.
There wasn't even a way to describe this.
Right.
This is how amorphous the situation was. I had friends and acquaintances at different startups that were making decisions unilaterally to furlough or terminate half of their employees. It was a wild time, and investors were unsure what to do. So we said, let's just understand and then solve a problem that we know will be ubiquitous for the industry. So within a very short period of time, less than 2 weeks, we were allocated one of the very last short codes for text message communication because the government deemed those critical. And we built an entire suite of community-facing, quarantine support, and finally staff, personal protective equipment, and burnout management programs that we released completely for free. And we developed an innovative programmatic custom material generation approach that some of our partners, including the top 4 consultancies in the country.
And when you say consultancies, that means?
Yeah, the likes of Deloitte and some other phenomenal groups.
Yeah.
So, that allowed us to suddenly go to some of the largest health systems and insurance companies in the country with a real solution to educate their local populations, to support their staff. We called that the COVID Companion Initiative.
And how many people did that end up reaching?
Oh man, we never got an exact count, but I know that we went from the day that we launched to a few days after. We had a map of having reached at least someone in every state, and it happened in something like 18 hours. It was extraordinarily fast.
Excellent. And so, what kind of an impact did that have in terms of getting people the information they needed to respond in the context of all this uncertainty around the pandemic?
I think it was helpful. It was heartening, and frankly, it also showed our potential target partners that we wanted to do what was right. We wanted to serve them, and that we had technology that was extraordinarily accessible, which positioned us well, even in the June, July, August timeframe when the dust began to settle from the first massive wave.
Right. And so then eventually you were able to get back to building your business, and rather than a free product, you were able to get back to a product that you were able to charge the users, not the patients, but the systems that were using your product. So by 2021, you were serving millions of people with this free product, and your core business was growing again. And you'd use the term, is that when you kind of framed it as this idea of deviceless remote patient monitoring? Is that kind of the timing of that terminology?
It was. That was the second, or at least another one of the top 3 breakthroughs. So,
and maybe explain it, like maybe take each of the deviceless remote patient monitoring. It's kind of it's a lot to think about when. Yeah.
It was a coined term.
Okay.
In the healthcare sphere, there had historically been patient engagement solutions, which are what they sound like. It's a way to stay engaged, but not necessarily in a clinically impactful way. And then there exists remote patient monitoring, which had traditionally meant a sophisticated suite of devices that could be reimbursed under the healthcare schema, fee for service. We realized that our offering really was a much higher quality, more clinically impactful offering than patient engagement, but at a fraction of the cost and in a much more scalable way than remote patient monitoring, kind of the higher quality, lower cost combination that they teach you about. And then we had to think about a way to communicate that. So on a very early call one morning, we thought of this phrase, well, what about deviceless remote patient monitoring? We tried it on 3 sales calls that day. By the way, if you Googled deviceless RPM, deviceless, 0 results. The strike through of, I can't emphasize enough.
New terminology.
It was completely new. I have the screenshots of Google. And 3 out of 3 executives on those calls said, oh yeah, we've been looking for deviceless remote patient monitoring.
Oh, okay. So it just fit right in.
It just clicked, yep.
So help us understand a little bit about where you, because we're going to get to the acquisition in a minute, but kind of where you were at the time geographically. I think you moved a couple of different places around Cortex.
Yep.
That I remember meeting with you in different locations, and your team was growing. I think it was 30. Maybe just tell us a little about where you were. Paint the picture of the team and the location.
Yeah. We started in 20 South Sarah in CET. I have very fond memories of just about every weekend being in that one office. And then we moved over to 4220, I think almost as soon as the building opened.
And that's the building with the Microsoft logo on it?
That's the one.
Okay. And how big was the team then at the time?
Yeah, it was 30, maybe a little bit upward of 30.
Okay. And so, at this point, and kind of skipping ahead into sometime in 2021, you were faced with another decision. So tell us what happened leading up to the acquisition of CareSignal by Lightbeam. In November of 2021 is when it was announced, although I'm sure you were working on it for a long time before that. Was selling the company a difficult decision? And why was Lightbeam Health Solutions an attractive acquirer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I began to realize in early to mid 2020 that CareSignal had developed an excellent puzzle piece. It was more than a point solution. But if we wanted to, impact 10 times more lives with our core product, 100 times more lives, we needed to solve a couple problems, and we needed to expand our offerings both laterally and vertically. One of the core problems that we needed to solve was simple. It was figuring out which patients in a broad population need help. Which patients can we serve effectively? Yeah,
because once you had a patient, you knew what to do in terms of the behavioral health intervention, but you didn't have this population view of identifying and prioritizing those people.
That's exactly right. And I would sometimes, embarrass the Lightbeam leadership team post-acquisition that I had their names circled on a whiteboard for months, if not years, before even meeting them or getting to know them, because they were and are the best at doing exactly that. They're the best at ingesting population level data, clinical claims. It gets very wonky and very hard, very fast. And then they're the best at figuring out what insights from a clinical perspective, from a total cost of care point of view, and then also from an incentive alignment perspective with all of the different types of payer contracts, what needs to happen to affect the best case scenario for that population. So strategically, the thesis was almost a smack you on the forehead. Wow, they're doing everything, which is much harder than what CareSignal was doing. They're doing everything that we need in order to bring this to the next level.
You said it was harder. Why was it harder?
In a nutshell, because from the Medicare, Medicaid, and highly disparate commercial populations served by all different types of healthcare providers, nothing is standardized. And the incentives change every year and sometimes more frequently than that. And then within a year, then people live their lives. They have their health change. So to be able to deliver a population level insight is both staggeringly important and extraordinarily hard.
I see. So because the insight you have this year isn't necessarily applicable next year, right? You have to iterate.
Yep. And sometimes today, even versus tomorrow.
Oh, not a year, but a few days,
Yep.
right? Okay. And one of the things you said that was interesting is you said that population health companies, these companies that have all these insights into who to target, but they don't necessarily, a lot of them don't necessarily know how to target, or what do you do, or how do you intervene. So tell me a little bit about that, about why are they have this area of expertise, but then they're missing what you had.
Yeah. Well, I think this was, and again, it was really credit to the Lightbeam leadership team that had this vision. They saw that if they could just take another couple of steps with their client partners, some of the largest healthcare organizations in the country, by bending the curve, by supporting patients clinically, essentially by doing what CareSignal does, then they could do more than lead the horse to water, so to speak. They could fully drive the ROI that mattered most.
We've got a lot of great entrepreneurs here, and hopefully they will be confronted with the situation that you were confronted with this decision to sell the company. Talk them through what that was like, and was that hard or easy to say, because you're going to give up control, and what was that like in terms of that decision to sell?
It was made easier because of the quality of the acquirer, and the expertise that they brought and their investors brought. But the thinking at the time was we could roll the dice again, raise some more money, because in 2021 capital was plentiful. Valuations were frequently reaching.
Unlike this year.
Unlike this year, it's not bad, to be honest. But especially if you're AI or functional AI. But valuations were frequently 30x top line revenue for a company that was still losing lots of money.
Okay. Which
is just a little bit silly, versus that swung all the way back to maybe 3 to 5x top line revenue, depending on profitability profile.
Right.
So we could roll the dice again and try and execute well and be lucky, or we could more or less pin things where they stood and then work within a larger, more established company.
Right. Excellent. So you were an executive with Lightbeam. You moved to Dallas to do this, right? And so you were there for a few years. And what brought you back to St. Louis? And then in concert with that, what led you to take on the leadership of TCare? Because I assume these were actually separate decisions, right? It wasn't. Well, or correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of like
close to one and the same. But
okay.
but as my wife would tell you, we love St. Louis. We love it more than we ever thought that we would come to love St. Louis.
I'm glad to hear it.
And when the opportunity arose, it was the perfect. In fact, we never moved a single piece of furniture outside of our St. Louis home when we went to Dallas. We couldn't bear it.
You kept your house?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, surprise. We came back and we just walked in and we were home again.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
okay.
No.
Okay.
That might have been more apathy than anything, But
nevertheless, though, that
exactly.
So you were. So tell us about TCare.
Yep.
And what was attractive? So you're now the CEO.
Yep.
And tell us the story of because you're not the founder. You came in and it was up and operational. So tell us a little bit about that company, and then tell us about what you're doing there.
Absolutely. TCare, it's a phenomenal company, and the mission is deeply motivating. So the company focuses on reducing family caregiver burnout. So in situations where, the eldest child perhaps is taking care of an aging parent, or a parent is taking care of an adult child with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or a loved one is taking care of a disabled veteran, or a grandparent is raising a grandchild in a foster adjacent scenario. And all of these different forms that represent tens to even low hundreds of millions of folks across the US at any given time.
Yeah.
There is a family caregiver that is often single-handedly supporting and advancing the healthcare outcomes and the cost control for the care receiver. And those caregivers, not through ill will, but those caregivers are historically hugely overlooked. And TCare figures out.
And they're unpaid.
Oh yeah, often completely uncompensated. And they're kind of left out in the wild, right? It's the compensation is sometimes important, but more than anything, it's a combination of community, education, resource. So TCare determines why a family caregiver is burning out or is at risk for burning out, deeply evidence-based, in fact, the most evidence-based platform protocol available. And then we have a combination technology and tech-enabled service offering that helps prevent or reverse that burnout when it is happening.
And what is the product and who are you selling the product to? Because I imagine that family is not the initial, right? You're not finding that caregiver first, right? They're in some system, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We have the privilege of working with many large organizations. One, DAV serves disabled veterans. Also, many managed care organizations that serve a broad range of populations, but lots of Medicaid, some Medicare Advantage, some duals, lots of special needs. But we work with those clients to help them manage, bottom line outcomes by going from the care receiver, who is usually their beneficiary, to the caregiver. And then we wrap around the caregiver and provide long-term support.
And so when you talk to these organizations that are interested in the patient outcome, is it a hard pitch to explain to them the importance of the caregiver, or do they kind of get it, or what's that like?
I would say intuitively, a lot really get it. I think of often the caregiver as the tissue paper holding back the ocean. You have someone there that's doing so much work that with just a little bit of help can.
And what is the help? What help do you provide?
Depends on the case. So someone with identity discrepancy disorder might have a very different care plan than someone with just a high objective burden and lots of stress and activities to coordinate. But usually we go above and beyond. And as you can imagine, a lot of the AI, a lot of the LLM functionality is now hugely integrated into the workflow. We go above and beyond to match and then coordinate those resources in tandem with the care plan administration. So it could be as simple as, hey, did you know that there is an area agency on aging right nearby that can help you, or that there is an adult daycare that provides a bit of respite under your insurance?
And so when you came into TCare, was it about a year ago or 10 months ago? Or?
I think about half a year ago. Yeah, about 6 months.
6 months,
Yeah,
just 6
recent.
months. Yeah, so to the extent you can say, maybe tell us about some of the things you're implementing and what changes you're making and what's working, what's not working.
I'm extremely lucky. The TCare team is world-class. Combination of knowledge about the payer-employer broker space, the managed care and overall value-based care space, and then on the technology side, I think the three legs of the stool are absolutely there. Heavy focus on gross margin improvement. We want to deliver the best product in the industry, and we want to do that in a financially sustainable way. And also navigating the shift from being a non-AI native company to being AI native, which means that agility needs to improve not by a factor of 2, but by a factor of 10, I think, to remain truly competitive long term. And that's what we're achieving.
Excellent. Well, thank you for leading TCare, and I'm glad you're doing it right here in St. Louis and building yet another company here.
It's a privilege.
And then I also, if you can tell, you have another side project, right? That you and your wife have another company, right? You can't be stopped as an entrepreneur, right?
I don't know about that, but about 3 years ago, I think shortly after the CareSignal acquisition, I started spending weekends with Dr. Peter Brower, who's a longtime St. Louisan, deeply connected in the healthcare and innovation space. And he said he wanted to build a technology-enabled home care company that he would be proud to work with for his own parents, which in that industry is a very high bar. It's surprisingly tough. And fast forward to today, and now the company Woven Home Care is up to, I believe, a bit over 100 employees, serving St. Louis, just expanded to St. Charles. It's deeply gratifying. Completely different kind of business, but to serve individuals one-on-one hundreds of times a week is a lot of fun.
Outstanding. So in a second, we'll turn to the audience for questions, and we'll do maybe 5 minutes of questions or so. And so when you ask your question, please speak loudly. And then, since we don't have a mic to pass around, and we will at a future event have a mic to pass. But for now, I'll repeat the question so that everyone can hear and so that we capture it for the recordings. But before we do that, please join me in thanking Blake for sharing an incredible entrepreneurial journey.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Thanks you.
So, questions? Just raise your hand, and I'll try to find you. Amy.
You are doing work that is maybe the most human touch work imaginable. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how, and this may inspire possibility for others, but I want to know more about how, you touched on it, but how the technology can translate into action or change. The Woven story sounds incredible. What is the delivery of technology-based care? You said a little bit about the delivery with it just doesn't sound scalable or touchable enough on its face. Clearly it's working, but I'd love to know more about the translation from technology to something that is really hands-on.
Oh man.
Yeah, and so I'll repeat it and summarize. As Amy's saying, what you're doing is so human, but you're using technology, and so how do you retain or improve upon that human touch when you're trying to scale it with technology?
I think that's the key. It's a question: can you keep the soul of that human-centric service with pure technology? And CareSignal on one hand certainly extends the soul and caring of a care management team, a care manager, a physician, a nurse, whereas Woven truly is 4, 6, 8 hours, in some cases 24/7 care for just one human being. Completely different. I personally have never been more optimistic that with some of the really day by day, hour by hour innovation that's happening, that we will be able to capture the soul of caring and scale that. One example that I'm fascinated by and very bullish on is addressing loneliness. I think that's an area where there will be tens of millions of individuals. In fact, there are now, and there will be tens of millions more in the coming decades that deserve some level of true personal care without it feeling like it's pure technology.
Can I poke at you just a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
How? Like, what is the idea makes sense to me. What is the execution of that? How does someone experience the technology in their life?
So take T-Care, which I think does a great job balancing this. So there's a digital only offering, which is educational resources, a community forum. We'll be announcing this publicly soon, but extraordinarily excited about this. And that is, education, connection to community, connection to local support groups. And it's pure technology. It really relies on, in this case, the caregiver, but the individual to take advantage of it. And on the other side of the equation, T-Care has a white glove concierge service to wrap around a caregiver, spend in many cases hours a month speaking one-on-one telephonically with them. And I think the real power will be in bridging those two. It's still having the one-on-one touch, and then it's getting hyped, but I think it's an appropriate level of hype because the ability to deploy a caring, large language model in the right way, where it's not just going to ChatGPT and saying, "Hey, make me feel cared for," hasn't been done yet, I don't think, but I think it will happen.
With enough information about them. Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Hey, Blake, could you talk a little bit about similarities and differences between the CareSignal business model, the T-Care business model? Maybe an example of a lesson you learned
Yeah, and I'll answer, and also I should say that Stephen is building another digital health services company, Sweet Spot. So he's our in-house digital health entrepreneur, and so kind of I think your question was sort of lessons learned from CareSignal that apply to your current work at TCare.
Yep, and Sweet Spot is doing it right, in my opinion. I won't go into it, but is a phenomenal company. The importance of gross margin sounds so mundane and is truly now one of the touchstones when I'm making strategic decisions about where and how to invest.
So I know we have a number of people in the audience that are grad students or undergrads in science, and so walk them through what is gross margin.
I'm a mere science undergrad myself, so if I can understand it, everybody can understand it. You sell your product for a certain price. Now, some of that is overhead. You have, then as a company, you have overhead. Let's put that aside. Let's just look at the cost that really is fixed to what you're selling, the variable cost of goods. So that's the delta there is your gross margin. And software historically, software as a service has had gross margins upward of 90%. But when you look at a lot of healthcare technology companies, especially if there's a services component, the gross margin plummets. If it's reported honestly, you can do some fancy games. Don't do those. So starting from the target gross margin and then in a top-down way, recursively building an offering that can reach it.
Yeah. Yes, I think we have. Let's do the one in the far back, and then and I think we have 3 back there. So we'll do 1, 2, 3. So.
My joking question would be, what barbecue do you like better, St. Louis or Dallas? But my serious question would be, obviously 2, different startup communities. What are some of the benefits you like over St. Louis over obviously Dallas with like Colossal? Like, what can you compare and contrast?
Yeah. So compare and contrast Dallas and St. Louis, and I'll let you answer. The full question in your answer.
I mean, you're going to get me banned from Dallas if I come back. Startup ecosystem wise, I didn't get the chance to fully experience the Dallas ecosystem in fairness, because I was purely focused on my work at Lightbeam, but St. Louis, from willingness to help, you drop anybody a note via email, LinkedIn, there will be an innate desire to help you as a founder or someone exploring entrepreneurship succeed. I have not found another community nationally that is quite so intentional about helping its own grow and succeed. And it's not insular. We want to help folks who are far beyond St. Louis come, grow, contribute bidirectionally, even if they don't move here physically. But the mindset is wonderful.
Right, and then barbecue sauce.
I'm a fan of Pappy's.
Okay, excellent. So we'll do one more in the far back, and then one in front here. So.
So do you have an evaluation system that you use to make sure that the people you care for that you meet the needs of the people that you care for?
You said, do you have an evaluation system to do what? To
make sure that the needs of the people that you care for.
to make sure the needs of the person you care for are being met?
Yes, especially emotional needs.
Sorry, especially for emotional.
Emotional needs. Sorry, we're having a little trouble hearing. Yeah.
Yes, I think the answer, and I would love to look at you, but then I missed the
I
microphone.
think you can take it out of there and just hold it, which I probably should have done with mine earlier.
There we go. No, because it's a wonderful question. So I think the short answer is yes. That really is, the product is built around making sure that we are patient, or in the case of TCare, caregiver centric. Thanks, Jim. But let me share a story about a deeper challenge that has not been fully reconciled. Often, CareSignal would bring a depression offering to risk-bearing providers, to large health systems that really want their patients to do well, of course, clinically, also financially. And we know that addressing and tackling depression, often by titrating medications, is one of the best ways to serve someone as a human and also to decrease their avoidable healthcare spend. But if someone reports a low mood, CareSignal wasn't an emergency service. So the best we could do is the same thing that you get whenever you call your provider. If this is an emergency, please hang up, call 911. There was integration of the suicide hotline, where we would often provide that individual with the option to speak with a representative from the suicide hotline. And in our logs, of course, it was confidential, but in our logs, we could see that those phone calls often went for hours, which is pretty powerful just to infer. And then the question that I know is unresolved is it better to have technology used that introduces some level of liability to the administering provider? Or is it better to simply withhold that technology and say, well, if we don't do it, we can't be liable, and this is already good enough because it's the standard of care? And that's, I think that's what separates, the innovators from the very well-intentioned majority. Is going into that uncomfortable gray zone and doing right by people, even if it introduces a little bit more risk.
And I think we had a question right here.
So, you've got a Transformers product with you here, and it's really making a huge difference. And your customers are, at this point, you're working with DAV and managed care providers. What are the next steps? I mean, everybody in their lives is a caregiver like this at some point in their lives. What is your next step? Is it going to be health systems? Is it insurers? What's that roadmap look like for growth? And what are you looking for to try and get buy-in to take that next level?
Yeah, and so what are the next steps for TCare in terms of the customers that you serve and how you have various sort of institutional buyers that allow you then to reach more people?
Yep, the Rosalind Carter quote, right? In our lives, we will either be a caregiver or a care receiver, to paraphrase. To your point, because caregivers are omnipresent, so must be TCare. The managed care space is powerful because the cost curve impact is so profound. Probably the next focus, which is already happening, it's just not as publicized, is on the self-insured employer space. About a third of the workforce of America at any given time is a family caregiver. And risk-bearing providers, especially accountable care organizations, are a great target. Often their members, their attributed lives are care receivers. So we can potentially use that as a channel to reach more caregivers. But the answer is really everybody. It is employers, payers, providers, and then special interest groups, innovators like DAV that are highly mission aligned.
Great. So maybe one more question. Oh, I didn't see you over there. Yes, right over here.
So, from my understanding, TCare is a great product that can reach a lot of people. But I'm wondering, in terms of what might be the possible setbacks that you might be facing right now, limitations, and then how do you see things being improved in the future
For TCare?
for TCare?
Yeah. So what are the challenges of TCare? What are the setbacks and limitations that you're facing in order to deliver an excellent product to help caregivers?
It's a phenomenal question. Scalability. We have, I would say it's the best, but we have a world-class team of clinical experts, specialists, we call them, that help serve our caregivers. And historically, just like care management within healthcare providers, health systems, you are doing well from a cost perspective if you have a ratio of 100 to 150 patients, in this case caregivers, to each specialist care manager. In order to really scale, we need to find ways to, once again, to Amy's question, to keep the soul, keep the heart of the interaction, but not just scale up by 20 or 30%, but instead think in orders of magnitude of improvement. And I don't think that would have been possible 2 years ago, and I think it is inevitable. And I think that TCare is best positioned to do it. It's a great question.
Great. Well, why don't we end on that and join me in thanking Blake.